call to order this committee meeting on the regulation of taxation, the cultivation, manufacture, and commercial sale of marijuana in Anchorage. I love the title of my committee. We will begin with an introduction of those at the head table today, beginning with you.
Christy White with the City Prosecutor's Office. Jody Davis, Amy Dabowski.
Dick Train Chairman.
Bernie Hall.
Bruce Schulte.
Erica McConnell, current planning section.
I'm Bill Paulson, municipal attorney.
Amanda Moser, clerk's office.
Jamie Hines, clerk's office.
Thank you. It's been a while since we've met, but we made it clear the last time that we had met that we were really not going to be ready to do much until the Marijuana Control Board finished their work. They wrapped it up. They've done a remarkable job, Mr. Schulte. We've watched it with a great deal of interest and wondered what we were going to have to deal with that you didn't at the state level. And I'm going to tell you, you didn't leave much for us to have to do. I think that is going to be so crucial that throughout the entire state, we're basically all operating under the same set of rules and regulations, and that's going to really be a benefit to everybody. So, good job with your committee.
I'll let the rest of the board know too.
Now, please do that. Where we are today is the land use, as we turn that aspect of this over to the Anchorage Community Development Committee, who handles all of our Title 21 issues. That ordinance has been drafted. As a matter of fact, Ms. McConnell, you did a great job of putting that particular document together. It was before the board at our that committee at the meeting before last. It has been basically accepted by the committee and sent to P&Z. I think the P&Z hearing is the
December 14th.
December 14th. So you want to be sure and get in the loop on doing that. And Mr. Trainey also, we're hoping for that to be on our agenda for the 22nd. And Mr. Trainey is scheduling an hour and a half or 2 hour work session on the Friday prior to that meeting. And at that meeting, we will be addressing, of course, the land use, and the other thing that we made a great hurdle on that Mr. Trainey has some, actually a copy of the document to share with you is the sales tax. We've got an ordinance that's drafted with that. That ordinance is going to the Finance Committee, who will be meeting the 17th of December, 12 o'clock in this room. So anything in regards to taxation, you want to be sure and be in that committee meeting. I can give you a thumbnail sketch of what that includes in it. It's based here, and I don't know what the final draft will look at. There'll be a lot of public testimony and input into this. It's basically a 5% sales tax. It'll be on the ballot if the Assembly approves this at the April 5th election. It's drafted to where this will be above the tax cap, and the reason it has to be above the tax cap is this is covering all new expenses for the municipality, the control enforcement of marijuana. So it would make no sense to put it below the cap because it's funding a totally new industry that has to be monitored within the state. There's a provision in it that we could, the body, every 2 years could look at doing an increase of no more than 2%, and over a period of time that could not be raised more than to a top of 12%, but that will be based on the expense of enforcement and oversight of the marijuana industry. And is there anything else I'm missing in that bill? I think we pretty well got it. But come to the Finance Committee on the 17th, and they will be going through it in detail. They will address that, and then that will be the committee that will send that to the Assembly as a whole. So it's very possible that also will be in the work session.
I've got a couple copies of this proposal.
Yes, and anything you want to add on that topic?
Just, I'm thinking of old friend Jim Cubis, who was on the semi with me a few years ago. He was always, his mantra was cost causer, cost payer. And that's what we're trying to do with this, make the cost causer the cost payer. So that's the reason we're gonna put it outside the tax cap. Because it's a new industry for this town, and we've got to figure out what we're gonna need to do to provide the level of supervision we need over a sale. So.
Very good. Moving on down our agenda, we actually put a little spot on here for you, Bruce, the Marijuana Control Board regulations adopted, comments that you would like to share with us?
Sure. Okay. Well, so we did adopt the regulations on November 20th, so about 4 days before our deadline. There was one follow-up meeting this week just to revisit one section that had to do with residency requirements, because it was felt that where we ended up on the 20th put the staff in a position where they might not have the resources to execute the policy we come up with. So that's what that meeting this week was all about. But so our part is done for now. It's off to the Department of Law for review, and then hopefully onto the Lieutenant Governor for signature. And I think in order to keep everything on schedule, I'm hoping that the Lieutenant Governor will sign off on that by January 24th, so that 30 days later, when it becomes effective, we'll then hit our next milestone, which is the date by which the state has to start accepting applications, which is February 24th.
Very good.
So far, it's looking good.
Outstanding.
Did the state come up with, once you apply, how long does the state have to respond back to the applicant?
90 days.
Because that's one thing we've been trying to tell community councils, is for their input to be valued, they've got to move faster than we're taking the summer off. Because
Yeah.
some of our community councils don't meet in the summertime.
Right.
They're going to have to speed that process up.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Something that we've tried to communicate to folks who want to get into this industry, particularly in Anchorage, is if they've identified a part of town where they think they might want to do business, go talk to their community council now, introduce themselves, let them know what you got in mind, start a dialogue now, so the community council is not surprised in February or April, or when they have people showing up for the first time saying, hey, I've got a license application now. I think it'd be, we've been talking, as you know, we've been talking to a number of the community councils around town. They're very curious that, they have questions they want to get answered, but I think more importantly, they want to know who these people are that want to open up a business in their part of town. So
We're going to have to get the map out that shows, sorry, Mr. Chairman, because it shows where business can open up legally, because you guys put a lot of restrictions. I'm so far from this, so close to that.
Right.
And so that narrows down the area, and I'm sure our planning department can produce the maps so an applicant will know where they can go.
We're working on those.
Good, thank you.
For those of you that are here in the audience, so you get an understanding of what our discussion is, when we get ready to do licensing for marijuana retail, grow, production, you're going to have to apply to the state. They will begin receiving those applications on February the 24th. And what will happen is when you fill that application in and deliver it to the state, it has to be address specific. So as soon as you do an application to the state is going to give a notification to the municipality of Anchorage that they've received this application. We then will immediately give notification to all of the community councils within the municipality of Anchorage that there is a license application that falls within their district. This is the standard procedure that we do with liquor licenses when they come down. And then we have 60 days, once we receive it at the city level, to respond. And we can do that in one or two ways. We respond that there's a protest to the license. If we do not respond, then the state proceeds as if there were no protest in issuing the license. So the community councils, they meet once a month, so they end up with this little challenge about doing a turnaround. And they also don't meet during the summer, but I think a good portion of these licenses are going to be dealt with before they ever move into a summer hiatus, because the applications are made February 24th. The state's got 90 days. we're going to have 60, the first 60 of those 90 to deal with it locally. So my guess is the majority will be moving.
Just because the state gives you a license doesn't mean you can open up, but you've got to still get a conditional use permit to open operations up.
Right. You have to get a conditional use permit, you have to get a land use permit from the city, and you have to get a dual licensing permit from the clerk's office as well. So, thanks, Bruce. Yeah. Amy or Pete, any questions?
I have a couple comments, but I just talked to Mr. Trainee about it, but it's something that I think, I've been talking with Assembly Council. One of my concerns has consistently been federal law. And I know our municipal attorney was probably at the same meeting Julie was at. And I think we do need to add a clause in here, essentially to, we'll be very blunt, indemnify assembly members. Because what we're doing is we're passing a law to allow and to tax a federally illegal substance. And I think we have to make sure on our applications, there has to be some sort of notice on there that it says that. So it's something that, I know Assembly Council came back to me and made the comment that she's concerned about as well. And so I'm sure we'll have more conversations about that bill. But I think if we can look into zoning regulations 1, 2, and just add maybe another warehouse clause, I don't know if that's even sufficient. But it's just something I think would give, it would close the gap on that concern from our council.
And I'll be very quick to admit that that question is way above my pay grade, so you're talking to the right people. We have anyone from the police department here this evening? Let's see anyone at that point. Legal department, Mr. Falsey, anything you want to share with us other than the main focus? We'll get into the dual licensing as the crux, but...
No, I think we'll reserve my comments for that portion of the meeting.
Yeah. And you and I have been chatting, but I'm under the impression that the legal department also is getting fairly comfortable with the regulations that have been adopted at the state level, and actually they ended up addressing, I think, 99% of our concerns and the regulations.
It's a good preview for the future portion of the discussion. We've been spending a lot of quality time with those regulations.
Thank you. Any questions of legal?
Just want to ask about what you said first. Bill, on Amy's concern, would you take a look into that and see if we do need to have language put into this? So to the fact that it's still against federal law. So just let us know. Thank you.
And I'll just be clear, if it's not there, I won't vote for it. So I think it should really be a non-issue, honestly, whereas clauses are whereas clauses, but I don't know if that's sufficient. I don't know. So
Just he's the one who's got to defend this in court. So I want to make sure.
I'm more worried about,
I think if anybody's going to be in conflict with federal law, Mr. Falsey, is going to be the people of the state of Alaska who voted to legalize this. All we're doing is regulating what has been authorized by the citizens of the state of Alaska. So,
I think that is largely in the court of my understanding.
yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Chair Hall, I wanted to ask a question, Mr. Schulte.
Absolutely.
Steve Riggs. Right now, the October 1st set of rates is what is online.
Right.
Do you know when and if what is sort of the final version from the board anyway, that went to the law department, when that will be released to the public?
I don't know. Well, I think it's actually out there now because we spoke earlier, and I was going to forward to him an email that has a link in it to the state's website where the November 20th adopted version resides. So I'll before we're done here, I'll try and clarify that, because I'm pretty sure it's on the state's website now. At least the link that I have in an email takes me to the state's website. So I'll try and clarify that before we're done.
Thank you. Anything?
Well, it's not. It's out there.
If you're looking at an agenda, the next is showing the finance department, and I've already addressed that issue. We've taken the finance and moved it into the finance committee, and that will happen on the 17th. So we'll move down into the planning department. Anything that you want to share with us, Ms. McConnell, outside of the fact that again, you've done an amazing job. You should feel kind of like maybe the weight of the world has been lifted off of you. I know that was a big piece of work.
Thank you. I did feel that a couple weeks ago when I finally finished the draft. No, I just wanted to let you know that I did present at the Federation of Community Councils last week, and I have had 3 requests from individual community councils to come and speak to them specifically, so I am also doing that. So as those requests come in, I'm doing my best to accommodate them. And again, December 14th, Planning and Zoning Commission.
That's a lot to accommodate. There's a lot of them. So
Part of my job.
Thank you for making that effort. Clerk, anything you want to share with us prior to getting into the crux of the meeting?
I will reserve my comments for the licensing conversation.
Perfect. And perfect. With that being said, I'm going to turn this over to you and Mr. Falsey at this time to move through the presentation on your ordinance here.
Excellent, thank you. I'll let you start,
Okay.
and then I'll come back.
So you may have in front of you a fairly hefty draft, AO 2015 without a number yet, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly amending Title 10 of the Anchorage Municipal Code to add a new chapter for the licensing and regulation of marijuana establishments in the municipality, where I think something like 59 pages. This is very much a work in progress, but we thought it had reached the point of its maturity that we were ready to debut, at least for discussion purposes, and to preview the approach that we're going to recommend taking here. And as you flip through this, especially Bruce, may well recognize a lot of familiar language. And the approach that we are recommending that be adopted here is largely a cut and paste exercise where we take the provisions of the state's Marijuana Control Board regulation and import them into municipal code with appropriate changes of actors and municipal code sites. And the reason that we are proposing that approach is at least for 4 purposes. The first, we thought it would be generally helpful if the public was forced to learn one set of rules for the most part, so we didn't have our own completely separate idiosyncratic municipal rules. 2, that by adopting the structure and format of the state's rules, where we have made different or supplementary municipal decisions, that would be rendered more clearly. So by way of example, if you were to turn to page 2 and 3, we have 1081.10, license restrictions, provisions of state law incorporated. Those pick up all of the provisions that were in the October draft that the Marijuana Control Board did and put them in Muni Code. Right after that, we have an 11 provision, which would be municipal supplemental provisions. It's not, the substance of these is not yet important, and we're not even particularly recommending these necessary, but this is an example of how it would work. You can see here, these are the state rules. The one that has been changed has been number 3. The Muni now has its own different number 3 that says, in addition to the disqualifying felonies that prevent you from obtaining a municipal control board license, actually additional crimes against the person under Muni Code, or violence crimes or crimes involving drugs, violence, etc., under Muni Code would also be disqualifications or something to that effect. So the second reason then is that we're trying to make clear where we have deviated from the control board regulations in a way which is pretty transparent to all parties involved. The third is there has been a lingering question about how much inspection firepower the Marijuana Control Board is going to have. And I think there has been an appetite at the municipal level to have our cops on the beat and to empower our cops to enforce the identical set of rules that are in play on the state level. We are picking them up and putting them in our code as well. This is an approach that we have adopted in a number of places throughout the municipal code. If you were to look at our Title 8 criminal penal code, you can see that there is one whole section where we have gone to state statutes and looked at all the drug crimes and picked them up and moved them into Muni Code verbatim. It's much easier for the police department to enforce and for the municipal prosecutors to take to court that way. We've even mirrored the numbering system. That's the approach that we're looking at here. And then my fourth and final one, if I may, Mr. Chair. Fourth and finally, we thought that this mirroring approach could actually streamline the process for interested license holders to the extent that a marijuana establishment is now having to apply to a state license, for a state license, and for a municipal license. This approach allows you to simply resubmit to us everything that you just submitted to the state with a supplement that gives us whatever minimal additional information we actually need. So we thought it would be probably the most painless approach for a separate municipal license, but still gives the municipality its full control over the process.
Mr. Train?
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate this because I do want our people to enforce the ones that are out there. Given the fact the state's $3.5 billion in debt, I don't see them having the force to go out there and check on this. I can see our code enforcement officers, our police department, our clerk's office doing this. And I've seen throughout here, you've got the clerk shall. Can you have something there so we can have somebody else like? I'm concerned that when it says clerk, that means we've got a couple clerks. I don't want to work them to death. So we can figure out some other phrase allows us to expand that to code enforcement or something.
Throughout some of the code, we've also added language where it's municipal clerk or designee, code enforcement officer, Anchorage Police Department, Anchorage Fire Department. So there is some sections where it does pull in other players that are involved in our current licensing system to be able to inspect or address issues.
I would just like to make sure designee's there because they do enough work right now.
Yeah, I think that point is very well taken through the chair. By way of example, if you were to look at the provisions which are all headered with an 8, because we were picking them up from Article 8 of the State Control Board regulations, there our refrain is the municipal clerk is sworn peace officer, a code enforcement officer, a health department officer, or a designee of the municipal clerk may.
What page you on?
46 of my draft. I'm not sure I have the same pagination that you do. There were things that we thought would live solely within the clerk's office, such as the actual issuance of licenses and the actual receipt of applications. But I'll say that has been a design question whether this is a significant enough workload that the standard business license regime that exists for all licensed businesses in the municipality may deserve a separate marijuana municipal licensing agent or something. That has not ripened to the point of a proposal or an alternative.
I just know when I sent her down to Colorado, they significantly increased their clerk staff to handle this influx. We may not have to, but I just want to make sure we've got the safeguards built in, that we can do that if we have to.
And I think part of the approach is in anticipating that the revenues that would come from the companion sales tax would offset some of these additional costs and possibly fund new positions to handle.
Well, I know I talked to finance and they told me the 5% will bring in between the low side 650,000, high side 2.95 million.
And
So,
one thing we're anticipating is that the clerk's office will handle more of the processing of the licenses and that the inspections. We would like to work with code enforcement as we've done in the past, and we've been already working closely with the Anchorage Police Department.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I may, a few other disclaimers and preliminaries. One thing I should say is that this has been an all-hands-on-deck effort. There have been significant contributions from the clerk's office, from legal, from planning. The structure that we earlier previewed for the assembly where we assembled captain's lead of different buckets have all been working on this, and this is, I think, a good product that has emerged from that group. So I just wanted to give credit to folks so that there weren't be a false impression this was all a law product. But in addition, I wanted to do one disclaimer of all this language, which is to say, this is a working draft, and I would hope it not be yet taken as a proposal for a few reasons. The first is, as Sherwood mentioned, we do not have a copy of the as adopted by the Marijuana Control Board regulations, so we were beginning with the October set. So there are already amendments that we need to incorporate from the state law. Second, we had made some comments to the Marijuana Control Board that we don't know if they were adopted or not, and we're going to probably do a crosswalk and adopt those things that we wished had been changed in the state regulations. Third, there are some land use provisions that are still now living in this toy model draft that will probably come out in light of Erica's companion measure. And fourth, by cutting and pasting, we made a lot of, there are things that are incorporated in this draft which may look like decisions that are not in any way to be taken as hard and fast. So, for instance, we picked up and copied the application fee schedule and the civil fines. Or maybe we X those out. The municipal clerk actually picked it up so we didn't scare everyone. But suffice to say, there are still decisions to be made. Nothing in this is yet gospel, other than the structure and the approach that we're proposing.
We also have some policy questions moving forward that we want to make sure we're working with both the Assembly and the internal municipal working group to see if there are things that the state's taking on, and I think that there's a couple opportunities that we don't need to incorporate them into our code, and so moving forward we'll have those conversations too, to make sure that we're just pulling with us all the things we actually want to address. I wanted to just, if it's okay, take a few
Yes.
moments to talk about some of the other documents that passed out. One of the exercises we did a few months ago, I'm referring to this colored sheet, is we worked in a small working group and we tried to identify both the licensing issues that folks were concerned about along with the land use issues, and we just keep this with us as a document to make sure that we're capturing all the things that came up in that work session a couple months ago and make sure that we're incorporating them in. But this is, a lot of the stuff was already addressed in the state regulations, and a few of these items aren't, and so there are a few opportunities where we're going to have some supplements in our code from that. And I also passed out 2 other documents just to give folks from the public and from the Assembly an idea of how we imagine this dual licensing process going. And a huge thing that we're looking at internally in this with the municipality is, we want this to be a painless process. So we want to make sure that folks apply with the state and then they come over and apply with us. And as we mentioned already, it's going to be their state application with a supplement. And we want that to begin moving through the municipal process at the same time that it's moving through the state process, so that we're not, so there's not a long wait period for a business to start up. And so we are working to move that quickly, and Erica and the clerk's office is working closely to make sure that the land use and licensing components are traveling together too. We recognized in this process that there's a lot of duplicative efforts that we're already doing with liquor licensing, and so how can we make sure that we're just traveling together? And ideally we'd like to put the documents before the body at the same time, so you would receive a resolution that had both the liquor license, the marijuana license and the marijuana special land use permit, and that would be before the body at the same time. So I'm referring to this sheet. At the top across, our proposal is that an applicant's going to apply for the state of Alaska license, and the state of Alaska will notify the municipality of Anchorage of the application. And when we receive that first notification, it's going to trigger an automatic protest from the municipality until they receive the municipal license and special land use permit. So then on a separate sort of plane traveling through, the applicant will apply with the MOA for the license and land use. The clerk's office and MOA planning will work together to process it through the various departments for approvals. Separate of that, the MOA planning department has its special land use process that will be traveling at the same time as these other processes. And once we travel along that timeline, the clerk's office and the MOA planning will prepare a resolution for the Assembly. The Assembly will have a public hearing on both the land use and the licensing at the same time. And then our proposal is that if the Assembly approves it, they can then delegate to the clerk's office to issue the license. But before the license is issued, we could have a final walkthrough by either code enforcement, APD, or AFD, or whatever various departments would want to do a final walkthrough of the business before it actually begins operating. And then the clerk's office at that point would issue the license. So just to give folks an idea of how things are going to be moving through. And the other document is a timeline, and these are drafts. We're still working on things and just trying to get our ideas out there. A lot of the land use stuff requires some public notice deadlines and notifying community councils and stuff. But trying to work through this process within about a 60 to 70 day timeline.
Mr. Mouse.
Thank you. Bruce, I have some questions. Maybe you can help. How many licenses do you think people are, how many applicants do you anticipate? Do you have any idea how many people are going to apply?
Guesses only. I mean, we really don't know.
Because one of the, I mean, we talked, and it was quite a while ago, and I haven't read what you guys recently adopted as far as, background checks or what you're going to be doing. So just say hypothetically, probably isn't that all 500 are going to qualify. Maybe, maybe not.
They might. I mean, they may not. They may not all be approved, in the same 90-day window. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, at this point, it's pure speculation as to how many will apply. Now, if you want to put an exact number to it, or a more precise number, I think within Anchorage, it's actually going to become simpler, because once the zoning ordinance is factored in, with the appropriate mapping overlays, we could figure out pretty quickly how many pieces of property in the city are even open to these kinds of businesses. That'll put a cap on it right there. I mean, we're not going to have any more applicants than we have available properties.
And I guess it goes back to, because nobody really knows how many's going to apply and how many essentially are going to survive the state licensing process. Is there concern for the clerk's office that essentially we're going to go through all this and a lot of them, or a significant portion of them, won't even qualify for both licenses? I think that was part of our discussion before, is kind of weed out the crowd through the state process, and then the municipality comes in, and we know that essentially they've been vetted through the state process. We have additional probably requirements on the city level, certain things, especially the zoning, but I mean, you could be really increasing your workload unnecessarily by doing it this way.
I don't know that there is a way to avoid that. I think it's inevitable. Once that license application is received at the state, we're going to receive notification. We have no choice but to proceed. Honestly, some of those may not be determined whether they're going to be licensed or not, depending on the response back from us, from the municipality. So, yeah, it's a complicated process, and a good observation. I'm sure there'll be some work done that will be for naught, but I don't know where to get around it. Something I'd like to share with the crowd real quick, just so you kind of get an understanding. I don't know how many of you are seeing this particular document, but don't let this intimidation looking at it going, oh my God. All you're going to do is fill out an application and deliver it. This is all stuff that happens within government, and it's all set out by municipal code. Liquor license comes in exactly the same process. There's departments it has to go to. There's just process that has to be followed. So you will put your application in, and it's going to come out the other end, and it will have this with all of this in between there. And something I'll share with you, when Amanda made the comment about the clerk's office, there will be times they'll bring licenses forward to us, and they will have an automatic protest on it. We get those with liquor licenses all the time, and the reason we do that is it's very possible that the day after we meet, they may receive the permit from the fire department that they didn't have. And when we take action on this as the body, then they can go ahead and issue that license. If we don't do this, then it's going to be 2 weeks before it ever gets before the body again. So this is a process that we created within government that keeps you from hitting delays just because of maybe a document has to come into the clerk's office, because the package does have to be completed before a license can be issued. Yes, Bill.
Yeah, I wanted to address Mr. Zabowski's concern somewhat. We had given some thought to this question, and I think we have a preliminary answer, which is to say that we think that our process should begin with notification from the Marijuana Control Board that they have received a complete application. So there would be an initial weeding out where if someone has submitted a junk application to the state, that doesn't fire up our machine. We wait until they have said all your pieces are in place. At that point, once their machine is firing, we as a local government are already off to the races, because we are already under timelines under the state regs to participate in their process. So it's not clear that we could benefit too much from waiting too much longer as the state process unfolds. The alternative, which could potentially be very labor savings for the municipality in some ways, would be to say you can't even apply for a new license until you already have a state license. But we thought that guarantees that there is a significant several-month delay beyond the Marijuana Control Board process, and we thought the two processes could work in parallel. would have already done the work but not really started our own decision-making process until MCD did. So,
Todd?
This may be helpful to Assemblymember Dombrowski. I've got some statistics from Washington, Oregon, and Colorado about their startup numbers, if I can share that.
Yes.
And this comes from a Marijuana Business Daily article from October 19, 2015. One of the interesting things is, depending on what your regulatory setup is, the analysis was that significantly affects what your startup numbers are. So in Colorado, they had a well-established medical marijuana industry with storefront operations, and their regulations were such that initially you had to have an up-and-running medical marijuana business in order to get a recreational license, and still had to jump through some hoops. So, and this is just their initial startup. The date that it became legal, January 1st, 2014, for recreational, they had 30 medical marijuana licensed facilities that were ready to sell recreationally. So, considering, I think there's something like a total of 900 now in the Denver area of all types of businesses, not just storefront, but cultivation, testing. It's not a huge number, and that's a state of 6 million, I think, approximately population. In Washington, they've got a whole different regulatory scheme, and I won't go into the details here, but when their recreational sales became legal July 2014, they had 5 stores statewide were ready to go. In Oregon, and again, this was somewhat different than the other two, and they apparently had less hoops to jump through. They had 250 businesses ready to go on the day it became legal. My own guess, and this is just my guess, it's not a law department guess, is that we won't see many at all, partly because marijuana on a personal level has been legal in some sense since the Reagan decision in 1975, partly because we don't share a border with any other states. That has attracted a lot of people into Colorado, certainly, and probably Oregon and Washington. So I think between those two factors and maybe just distance from the lower 48, I'm guessing it's going to be a slower start.
Yes.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I mean, it's helpful. I'm just trying to figure it out, and I wouldn't say I was very into either idea. But logistically, I'm thinking, are background checks still a part of the state process?
Mhm.
So are they incorporated into the city process? Because we can't rely on them if they're not done. So if we don't have background checks in here, we need to have them in here.
So Mr. Chair, there is a wrinkle with background checks that we as a municipality cannot order ourselves a national criminal background check for reasons that I cannot off the top of my head, which I have to verified to be true. So what we have proposed in this reg was that you had to apply for it for the state, and then the Marijuana Control Board comes back and tells you that something showed up on your criminal national history check. You have to tell us what they told you. That's, I think, the best workaround we've got so far, but we're open to ideas.
And kind of along that line, if I could just finish that thought, it's kind of like the fire inspection. So with an alcohol or whatever, if we conditionally approve it, it meets these criteria, then if they come back and the state says they're good to go, they're good to go. But if there's a flag in the state, basically, and it says there's a wrinkle or something shows up on their background check, I don't know what their litmus test is. Well, it's there, but we're still going to approve it. But would there be a mechanism so the assembly could reevaluate?
I think the answer to that question is yes. The Marijuana Control Board regulations say that a municipality can conditionally protest or request that a condition be put on a license if it is approved. If we were, for instance, to say that certain felonies are disqualifying at a municipal level, but are not necessarily disqualifying at the state level, I suppose we could then say we request that the application be conditioned on the fact that the national criminal history does not reveal the presence of any of these felonies. How that works in practice, I don't know. Maybe that's a negotiation we have going forward, but there is a mechanism for us to input requested conditions at the state level.
And I think that was kind of my biggest, trying to figure out, because I had heard they were doing that national background check, and I thought, well, it'd be cheaper just to let them go through their process, and then we know the ones we're dealing with essentially are ones that are good applicants, let's put it that way. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Schultz?
Yeah, I was just going to, on the whole subject of background checks, you had mentioned that the muni might apply additional restrictions other than what the state's regs stipulate. And right now at the state level, there's sort of two measures. One is an applicant cannot have a felony conviction within the previous 5 years, I believe. And that was written in by the legislature in House Bill 123. And then in the body of the regs itself, it says that other disqualifying criteria are prior experience with an alcohol establishment selling to minors, for example. That's a disqualifying event in someone's recent past. So an opportunity here for simplicity might be to simply use the same criminal sideboards that the state has stipulated for the municipality, because then the state's check will have met all the same requirements. You won't have to do an additional one. That might just be a way to streamline the process.
Amanda, did you have a comment? I saw your hand kind of do this.
I just thought maybe it might help to clarify too that the background check is done at the front end of the application process for the state. So it's sent over to the local governing body with that background check already complete. So they wouldn't be able to make it through the process and then discover something.
That was very helpful, actually.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just think we have to be careful that we don't create a catch-22 situation where we're saying that we're not going to give them final approval until the state is basically signed off on it. And then the state comes back saying, well, we can't give you final approval until the muni gives you a land use permit or a special use permit or whatever it is. We do want to make it possible for people to weave their way through the bureaucracy to get a license.
Mr. Train?
We were saying earlier that people would put in with the state, then the state would do the background check. Then they'd come to us and say they had a check through. The state had approved their application. Aren't we going to get a copy of that from the state? Because I appreciate everybody out there is honest, but I don't want somebody to come to the city and say, yeah, I'm all approved by the state for background check. That concerns me.
Mr. Chair, I think that might be a productive line of inquiry for us to reach out to the Marijuana Control Board to see what is in the art of the possible on that.
If it
There's a
was,
state
please.
statute that governs who may request a national criminal background check, and we do not qualify under that state statute. Whether the state, as a matter of course, could agree to provide us with what information they have, I don't know. But I don't see any reason for an applicant who has received notice from the board that there's something on their history that we couldn't say as a condition of your receiving a municipal license. You have to tell us what the Marijuana Control Board has reported to you. So
But if they're already in operation by that time, or they go into operation, it's going to be hard to pull back their license. Just saying, would you guys talk to the state and see what we can work out?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else? Okay, just for my own edification here, I want to kind of walk through this. Mainly, Mr. Trini, I'm going to be talking to you now. We know that land use is going to be before P&Z on the 14th. When, in all probability, would P&Z be through with that?
It's hard to say because it's unclear how many people will testify, how many issues will be raised, that sort of thing. But knowing that this needs to be adopted by the Assembly no later than the end of January, I'll be working with P&Z to get extra meetings scheduled if they can't complete it all on the 14th.
Okay. Very good. So what we're sure of then is the land use problem is going to be before it's still the latter part of January.
Yeah, and I've told you, I think, to you guys before, I'll run as many meetings as we have to push this through. So if we have to have extra Sunday meetings, we have extra Sunday meetings.
And I would assume that you'd like to see the Title 21 ordinance and the Title 10 ordinance together.
Yes.
So, okay.
So what I'm trying to validate here is if there will be anything in regards to marijuana on the December 22nd agenda. I'm not sure that there will be. We know that
You could have the taxation introduced on the 22nd.
Right.
Because we've got to get that passed to get on the ballot at a certain date, so.
Just the way Yeah, ballot
in the
measures.
end of January.
Yeah, well, yeah, the assembly has to approve ballot measures by the end of January.
Right.
So it has to be introduced
Exactly.
at the 12th meeting.
Yeah.
So, but I was going to tell you, Mr. Hall, Bruce brought it up earlier, the land use plan map, we didn't use the phrase, but that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So we know where these are going. Mr. Trini has authorized a joint meeting of P&Z and the assembly as a whole to deal with the land use plan map, because that's a complicated one. A 2-hour work session on the 22nd.
Okay. Very good. And with our licensing, you're waiting to get final copy of the regulations as drafted. At that time, then you'll be able to go in and do kind of final work on this, that it's adopted. Any idea when this document here might be ready for introduction to the body?
Yeah, I'll defer to Deputy Municipal Clerk Moser on that question, but I would say that I think the answer is somewhat dependent on when the Marijuana Control Board's review from legal is anticipated to end.
Right.
So, if a member who may know a lot about that.
Yeah, Bruce?
Mr. Chair, I don't know. The hope is that it'll be handed off to the Lieutenant Governor no later than January 24th. That would be sort of like the drop dead date in order to meet other milestones. But I'm hoping that law will be done much sooner than that. I don't know when.
Yeah. And so in response to that, I'll say, if we begin work with the November draft on the theory that there will not be significant changes between the November draft we submitted to the Attorney General and what emerges from the Attorney General's office, our proposal would be
January 7th. And one of the things we would propose to do, I noticed at the bottom of the agenda, potentially next committee meeting, we'd like to go through, and there's about 10 policy questions that we just want to confirm with the committee where they stand on those, and then capture those to move forward for an introduction on the ordinance.
So what we've got, Mr. Trainee, is, as Ms. Dombrowski pointed out, the taxation, the sales tax, we've got to deal with in January, by that second meeting in January. So hopefully we will be able to get that one through the Finance Committee, get it in for introduction, so we'll be able to deal with that. We could actually be into February dealing with the other two, the land use and the dual license, if we aren't able to make it prior to that.
Well, I will say, if it looks like the Marijuana Control Board timeline is going to be pushed so close to the drop dead date,
Right.
there wouldn't be significant harm in adopting something which is 95% a mirror image of what they have, and then we can go back and amend it after the fact.
In a perfect world, we'd have all of this dealt with in January. So, we're gonna do our best shot at getting it there, but if not, even if we're at that first meeting in February with the land use and the dual license, we'll still be ready for a go date, because we won't be doing anything until 1st of May, as far as actual issuing a license coming to us, so. Okay.
My goal is for the taxation to have it in front of our Finance Committee on the 17th and for introduction on the 22nd.
Very good.
So then we can take action 2 weeks later and just get it set up for our next assembly in January.
Anything else that you want to share with us on dual licensing?
Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for the work you're doing. We're getting there. We're going to be fine. And when you're ready to get into business, the comfort zone now is the Marijuana Control Board has done a great job. They're going to be ready, it would appear, on February 24th, as it's laid out in the statute that was passed. And we're going to be ready for our July date as well. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. Bruce, we've got a topic on here that basically I want to let you kind of lead, because you guys had a lot of conversation, and that's marijuana clubs.
Okay, so for those who weren't following, there was a lot of debate this summer about marijuana clubs, what their status would be, whether they were going to be defined in regulations or not. And we had some guidance from Department of Law that basically, since they were not articulated in the ballot measure, they were therefore outside of our scope of authority. And there was a lot of back and forth about that, but I did introduce an amendment on November 24th, which passed, which removed a specific prohibition on marijuana clubs. In doing that, though, I did offer that was not an endorsement or an effort to promote clubs. Rather, it was just us acknowledging that we didn't have the legal authority either to craft regulations around them or to prohibit them. So unfortunately, it leaves them very much in a state of limbo legally. But the board's position is we don't have a position on them right now.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Have you talked with any legislators? Do you think they're going to take that up in this session and go back and try to tweak it? Can they even tweak it?
They could, and those discussions actually started last session. As soon as the first club opened, I mean, within a week, there was a move in the Senate, at least, to specifically prohibit marijuana clubs. And at the time, I suggested that, rather than prohibiting them, I suggested, well, let's wait and see what the Marijuana Control Board comes up with in terms of operating parameters, and then next session you can decide what, if those are acceptable, if you still need to, ban them or put additional sideboards on them. Oddly enough, though, based on my earlier description, we kind of got to a point where the Marijuana Control Board couldn't do that. What we did do, though, as an alternative, is we put another provision in the regulations to allow, under certain circumstances, an on-site consumption endorsement for retail stores. So somebody who has a storefront where they're selling cannabis products could, if they meet other operating parameters, have an endorsement to allow on-site consumption. Now, what those operating parameters are, we don't know yet. That's going to be the subject of a later effort, not much later, probably January or February. And it will undoubtedly have ventilation and sight lines and all that will undoubtedly be part of it, but beyond that, I'm not sure.
Sure, I appreciate that. And so I guess if you're not comfortable answering, you don't have to, but just to get your pulse on it, since the Senate kind of brought up a ban, or if they were talking maybe behind closed doors or in the hallways about potentially banning clubs, do you have any sense that's where their inclination is? Or is it just really no idea yet?
This is just a personal perspective.
And I won't hold you to it.
Okay, so my sense is it was a bit of a reaction to folks that were starting up businesses that appeared to be unregulated and without boundaries, and I think that made a lot of legislators uncomfortable and understand that. My hope is that if we once we develop the parameters for the on-site consumption endorsement, I'm hoping that will simply replace and completely supplant even the notion of having a marijuana club. Instead, somebody could just have a retail store with the on-site endorsement in communities that allow for it. My hope then is that that'll change the dynamic in the legislature and they won't feel a necessity to ban a marijuana club because there's another regulated thing that looks a lot like it that they can maybe live with. That's my hope.
Mr. Trainer. They would still have to live up to a state smoke law, though. You understand that?
Oh yeah. I get that. Some communities, probably won't allow these, and the ones that do, there will undoubtedly be some boundaries, some operating parameters. One thing I would add is a lot of the requests that we were getting for that type of business license were coming from municipal governments or local governments in Juneau and Fairbanks notably, but from others around the state. So it wasn't just from people who wanted to operate or go to one of those types of businesses. These are actually, Mayor Fairbanks and council members in Juneau were saying, hey, we're going to need this kind of an animal. Would you guys put it in your regulations? So that's what we did.
And I'll just add that technically speaking, if you look at our smoking ban, smoking clubs are allowed in the municipality of Anchorage. There's specific requirements for those smoking clubs. And I'm specifically talking about tobacco, but we did go back into our smoking ban and add marijuana. But my assumption would be if they follow the smoking ban, I know there's at least one smoking club in town for tobacco. And I know they operate because I went and checked it out because I was curious. But I know the mechanism is there for clubs. But
If I may, Mr. Chairman, that's really good to know. And in fact, I would offer that would be a really good starting point
I can hook you up. Have you seen it?
for us. No, I haven't actually.
I'll pass you around the phone.
Okay, great.
You should go look.
Because since we're sort of working cooperatively between the state and local government, this would be a great opportunity to kind of do the reverse and have those provisions in there for the endorsement that we think at least Anchorage would be willing to go with. So,
Mr. Peterson, anything? Okay, thank you. Next topic here is the next public town hall, and to be honest with you, at this point, I'm not feeling that we're necessarily going to need to do that. I think that the public's had a great opportunity to engage with the Marijuana Control Board and input at that point. You're going to have the opportunity with P&C to be engaged in that, and I'm hoping that through most of this, we've been able to answer the majority of your questions. But I will tell you that if I get feedback from the public, would really like to see this happen one more time. We could look at putting that together to provide that service. And one topic that's not here that I do want to add is utilities, and Phil Steyer is here. And Phil, you said you have some information you'd like to share? Or am I putting you on the spot here?
No and yes. I don't really have anything specific for today. I represent GDH Electric. We obviously have paid close attention, looked at Denver, looked at what's happened elsewhere, and we've had some conversations with Bruce and some other folks interested in the process, and Erica has incorporated a step into the land use ordinance that we believe will be helpful and a lesson learned from lower 48, where what I heard from other utilities is that one of the problems was they were always sort of the last thing folks thought of, and we don't want to find ourselves in that same position. So I think things have been pretty well addressed in Erica's ordinance, and
Outstanding.
we'll see what happens now.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Appreciate it. Public comment. Anyone have anything they want to share? Okay, thank you. I really want, before I close the meeting though, I want to re-emphasize to you, Mr. Bowski.
Oh, I'll wait till after you guys. Go ahead, emphasize.
Okay, the Finance Committee meeting next week, I'm sorry, the 17th, will be in this room at 12 noon, and the sales tax will be addressed in that meeting. That'll probably be the majority of the topic of that meeting, because Ms. Gray Jackson is trying to help usher that one through as quickly as we can. And P&C for public testimony on the land use is on the 14th at what time?
6:30 p.m. at the Assembly Chambers at the library.
Okay, 6:30 p.m. Assembly Chambers at the library. So I think both of those, for all of you that are looking at being a part of this industry, it would be very beneficial for you to attend those, even if you're not there to testify, but just to listen to what's going on. And again, I really want to reiterate to you, don't be, like I say, intimidated by this. What is happening here is no different than any other business that's going to come in and open in town. You're going to have to fill out an application. You do that process, and you file your application. There's going to be some public notice, but anybody going through this, if they're doing a liquor store and a liquor license, you're not going to do anything, honestly, any different than what's required of that. So the way that it's shaping up, I think that this is going to be a pretty seamless process. I'm particularly excited about the fact that the application you do for the state will be the one accepted by the city. There may be a document added to it, but you're not going to have to redo that whole thing. It's not going to be like going to the hospital and giving your entire medical record to the emergency room, and then everybody you see after that, you have to repeat that same process one more time. We're really going to be sharing that information. Ms. Dembowski.
Thank you. And I wanted to go back to something Mr. Falsey said, because I think he was 100% correct. Push comes to shove. I think whether it's a substitute or version that we might have to tweak a little bit, or it's just amendments, depending if there's only a couple. I think that's totally acceptable, and I wouldn't have a problem with it. But the other thing I would ask, I see our next committee meeting's listed for early January, and my preference, and if the committee disagrees, I'm fine with it, but my preference would be, this is a very large document. I would like the opportunity to read it over the weekend and then actually meet again before. That way, if we have anything that we would like them to change or comments on before they get too far
soon as we've got final drafts of that, we'll make sure that this committee all gets copies as soon as they're available.
Okay, so we will get a final draft before it actually gets like introduced
We
and
won't,
pushed through.
no, it's not going to go there until it comes to this
Okay,
committee.
I just want to make
So-
sure because I couldn't read it during the meetings.
Yeah, no.
Kind of big.
I agree.
And I would just
we
emphasize,
need
this
to
is
have
not the
someone
one to
else
spend
talk.
quality time with.
Yes.
Let us clean this up and do some changes, and in short order, we'll have a.
Very fair enough.
Okay. I believe we're ready to go home. I love you and keep 30 minutes of their life back.